Hey YouTube, how's it going? Very excited about this video here that I'm going to share with you all. This is about how you figure out which numbers you need in order to have successful rental properties. A lot of people are interested in getting in rental properties because it provides their residual income, which can potentially allow you to retire once you amass enough residual income. So we're rolling up our sleeves and diving deep to figure out what numbers we need to make successful properties. As always, thanks for tuning in. If you find any value in my content, please like, share, and comment. Any questions, please ask.
So there's been that age old debate when building a rental portfolio, do you want to buy singles or do you want to buy multifamilies? So you can really be successful with either approach as long as you know the numbers. The one thing about buying single family properties that there are a lot of costs that you can pass on to your tenant or aren't even assessed because they are a single family. Whereas with your multifamily, you're going to have costs that are present that aren't present with single families because there's a multifamily and the rules are a little different. So, for instance, where I am, we have to pay, if you have a multifamily property, you have to pay trash, you have to pay for a fire system certification, you have to pay pest control, your lawn care and snow removal, public lighting, water if it's common and not metered, and then you have a fire escape certification that you have to pay if you have a fire escape on your property. So those are just some of the cost differences. However, even with that, my personal opinion is that unless you're buying single family houses in bulk, you should always buy multifamily properties for your rental portfolio. And the logic behind that for me is it spreads your risk around. So let's say if your strategy is, you say you want to buy one property or maybe two a year. So if you buy one single family property, if you have a vacancy, you're at 0% occupancy. So there's no money coming in for that month while you have a vacancy. Whereas if you have a multifamily property, let's say I buy one quad, which is 4 units, and I have one vacancy. Now I still have 75% occupancy. So those are three other units that can bring me in income every month. Or the months when I have a vacancy in another unit. So it just spreads your risk or reduces your risk of 0% vacancy. So that's why personally I prefer multifamilies over single families. But that's not to say if there's really an area that I like, maybe up and coming, and I can get the property for a good price, and I know that I won't have a problem running it out. I may still look at a single family, but those are the one-off cases and not what I like to be doing. The other thing about single families, or the interesting thing I'll say that I also look for is their zoning. So I know in Philadelphia they rezoned some areas, so you have some single family houses that are actually zoned now for multifamily. So that may be a unique opportunity there for you to get that single family house and then turn it into a duplex. And then the other thing for my just my personal opinion, especially if you're new and just starting out, you always want to buy either a turnkey property, which means it was recently renovated and everything is set up ready for you just to turn the key and start making money on it. Even better if there's already if that turnkey property is already occupied, or you want to buy distressed properties. And distressed properties meaning it's empty. There's a lot of rehab that has to be done in order to get it up to a point where you're able to rent it out. And what that does is it allows you to execute the BRRRR method, which you'll hear about online and which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then I also warn people who are just really starting out, stay away from occupied, slightly distressed with old mechanicals. I said those should be for experienced people only because those can quickly become a nightmare. So what happens is you already have people living in them, so you just can't go rip everything out and replace everything new. So you kind of have to work around the tenants. And then if you had have a property where the landlord or previous landlord wasn't keeping up on their maintenance. You're just going to have issue after issue after issue that's just going to really suck your cash flow dry every month. So you really want to make sure that you prepare for that going in. And that's something that most people who are new don't really have a grasp of. So that's why I really say, if you're experienced in multifamilies or in rentals, period, um, you know, have at it. But if you're new, you should really either look for those turnkey opportunities or those really distressed opportunities. So now, when you're buying and holding, a question that I'm often asked: well, how do I know what the value is? How do I know, you know, let's say if I'm looking for a turnkey, how do I know what the true value is? If I'm looking for a distressed property, how do I know what that after repair value will be? So I tell people, so there's two approaches in finding the value for rental properties. So you can either use the income approach or you can use the comp approach. So using the comp approach, that's the same that's used for single family houses. So what you're doing, you're looking at recent sales in an area for buildings of comparable size, and then comparable size, and then also comparable finishes, comparable products. So if you're looking at, hey, I'm just gonna completely redo this building, or I'm buying a building that's completely redone, then you're gonna be wanting looking at similar size buildings in that area that have just been recently redone to see what they sold for to get the value of what that property would be. Or let's say that you can't really use comps because there haven't really been a lot of buildings comparable to yours that have sold in that area. So the other way is using the income approach. So with that, the value is your gross schedule rents, which are just how much rent if running on 100% occupancy. So if all your units are occupied, what's your total rent that you're bringing in? Then you times that by the income multiplier. So the income multiplier, it's a scale where typically you 85 is more distressed areas. So if you're running in the area, you may have abandoned properties on the block, or there are a lot of abandoned properties generally in the area. That your rents, your gross schedule rents, monthly gross schedule rents, would be multiplied by about 85. If you're in a good area, then which is your regular standard neighborhood, not really too much no, or too many abandoned properties, not too many vacant properties. Really not a neighborhood that has a lot of blight. Just like your average regular neighborhood, you would multiply your monthly schedule rents by 100. So you can go anywhere from distressed to good, and where you see the neighborhood that you're buying that property in, you would use a number in between 85 to 100 typically. If you're, I'll call it an excellent area, such as your downtown, in the business district, close by the business district, where there are a lot of new properties that are built. There are a lot of professional residents in the area. Typically, you can multiply your scheduled rents by 110. But on average, you're probably looking at multiplying it somewhere between 85 to 100. So an example for that, so you're in a good neighborhood, and your total rent that you can bring in is 3,200 a month. So you would do that 3,200 times 100, and the value of that property would roughly be about $320,000. And then just a quick mention, people say, hey, I don't know how to find the rental rates in the area. So if they're unknown, there's a few websites that you can check out. You can check out rentometer.com, apartments.com, hotpads.com, craigslist.com, and just look for rentals that are in the area that you're looking for. And those will give you a good gauge of the rents that you can receive for that area. And then also just briefly, Cap rates, they're not typically used in properties with 10 or less units. So, for the purposes of our conversation, I'm specifically talking about 2 to 4 units. So, we're not even going to be mentioning cap rates. Cap rates are more of that commercial real estate once you buy or you're looking to buy those actual apartment complexes. But for the residential multifamilies, which are 2 to 4 units, cap rates aren't considered. So when you're looking to buy, you're either looking based on the income approach or the comparable approach. So now that you have what the value should be, the next question is okay. Well, what's my max allowable offer? So actually, what the bank says is okay, cool. You can offer up to the value as determined from either your income approach or your comparable approach, which the bank will lend on because there's other properties in the area that have sold for that much. So I'll just put in that caveat as long as the cash flows. And then also I say always use the income approach when possible, like as you're thinking of what you want to pay for the properties. Just because if you're looking at the comparable approach, sometimes that gets skewed by other investors that overpaid for their properties. So obviously you don't want to overpay for yours. So you want to look at the income that the building's producing, and then going with that. And then banks still lend up to typically 75 to 80% of the property value. So for a turnkey property, you're going to be walking in or coming to closing with about 20 to 25% as your down payment. So now, if you're purchasing a distressed property, your max allowable offer is 65% of the ARV minus the construction costs. So typically you hear that when talking about flips, but it's really no different when you're looking at a property that you're going to buy, fix up, and then rent out and hold. And the reason why that is because most banks they'll refi up to 70 to 75% of the value once it's improved once the property's improved or the after repair value. So this will allow you to execute the burr strategy. So it leaves some room for reimbursement of your entry and holding costs, and then may also allow you to pull out some equity as well. And then when you're looking to execute your burr strategy, what I've found is that those smaller regional banks and credit unions are typically really good at working with people over those larger national banks. So you just may want to look at into those before you look into like a larger national bank. So once you identify which bank you want to go to, from the bank's perspective, what they do when they're underwriting your deal, they look at they look at your credit worthiness, but when they're looking at the property, they also look at something called the debt service coverage ratio, and what that is the percentage of profits compared to the collected rents. So basically, banks typically want to see at least a 1.25 to a 1.3 DSCR in order to approve that property to lend on that property. So what that means is for every dollar that you pay towards the mortgage, they want to see you making a 25 to 30 cent profit. So, for example, let's say your mortgage payment is $1,800. So then the bank will want to see your rents being at least 2250 to $2,340 a month in order for them to say, okay, that's a good deal for us. We're confident that you'll be able to pay us our money. It's great. We'll lend. So now this is the tricky thing. The bank is not your friend. So the bank's gonna have their ratio, which makes sense for them to lend on, but that doesn't mean that that ratio is necessarily gonna work for you to cash flow on. So in this example, we'll dive a little bit more into it later. If you're only bringing in 2250 to 2340 a month, and your mortgage is 1800 a month, you're actually going to be in the red every month once you consider all costs. So just some quick tips, what I always say, you always want to buy based on the current condition and cash flow, not the pro forma, because what happens is the banks, they want to see when you go to refinance what your current condition is, what your cash flow is. They're not looking at, okay, well, if you do this and this to the property, then you'll be able to get you know X amount higher. So when I'm talking about this bank, I'm talking about the bank that you're using to refi. So you're already getting into the property. Typically, people get into the property using some sort of hard money loan. So you're in the money. So you're in the property using the hard money loan, and then you have to refi out of that hard money loan into typically a traditional bank. So the bank is looking at your actual cash flow when you go to refi, and it's looking at the condition of your property when you go to refi. So when you're buying that property initially using the hard money, you want to ensure that you're buying it based on the current condition and cash flow. You don't want to buy it based on numbers that the seller may present. Well, okay, well, if you fix it up, you should be able to get this much for rent versus however much I'm getting now. So I always tell people that unless the work is 100% complete, you don't get any credit for it. So you don't get credit for telling me if I fix it up, I should be able to charge more in rent and I should be able to get more for rent. So now you're going to charge me more for your property, even though your property hasn't been maintained at all. So I buy based on the current condition and cash flow, not what that future will be. And then once again, just because the bank approves your loan doesn't mean the numbers will cash flow. The bank, they're concerned about lending their money out, making a profit on their money. They're not concerned about what you're walking away with every month. So therefore, you have to make sure that you know your numbers to make sure that you can cash flow as well, because the bank, they know that in the event that you can't pay, they can always foreclose. And since in the instance, let's say if you're buying a turnkey property, you're putting down that 25 to 20 to 25% as a down payment, so they have some cushion in that property. So that's why they ensure that their position is protected. And then also always be conservative with your numbers. I tell people always do your calculations based on either a half a point to or half a percent to 1% greater than what the current interest rates are. So this just makes sure that you're protecting yourself all the way around on the deals. So now the cash flow myth. So what you often see people are saying, hey, this is a property that I have. So in this example, I have a quad, a 4 unit. So there's 4 1 bedroom units. I can rent each unit out for $800. So that means that my gross rents are $3,200. And then my mortgage and escrows, so this is assuming a $320,000 value. Your mortgage at 70%, 225. So your mortgage and escrows are 1,800. So your rents are 3,200. Your mortgage and escrows are 1,800. And then people say my monthly profit is $1,400, and that's how it's marketed to a lot of people. However, all costs haven't been considered. And I'll talk about costs on the next slide. And even if you plan on self managing your properties or you plan on handling the repairs and maintenance on your own, you should always be paying yourself. You should still always include those numbers into your budget as costs, just in case your situation changes. You may get into managing properties and realize, hey, I really suck at managing. I don't like managing. Let me bring a property manager on. If you haven't considered those costs in your numbers, you may not have room to do that. Similarly, if you just get tired of having to do repairs and maintenance, or let's say you want to go on vacation and you don't want to have to worry about repairs and maintenance, you'll have to pay somebody to handle your repairs and maintenance. So I always tell people, even if you're going to be doing that yourself, you should always factor that into the budget to make sure that there's room there in the event your situation changes. And then also, if you're doing it yourself, that extra money that you're quote unquote saving, that's not really profit. So profit is your amount earned minus your finance and operating costs. So you self managing and you handling the repairs on the property, those are all your operating costs still. Whether or not you want to pay yourself for it, that's totally up to you. I suggest paying yourself for that. But that's those are operating costs. So your profit is anything that's left over after what you earn. So the rents that you bring in minus your finance or your mortgage plus whatever your operating costs are. So then people may look at them and say, okay, fine. So my monthly profit, I said it was 1,400 before. So let's minus 10% of my rents for property management. So now it should be $1,080, right? Well, let's look at your cash flow calculations. So your cash flow, or you may hear people refer to it as your NOI or net operating not net operating income. So that's your gross schedule rents minus your mortgage and escrow, minus your property management, minus your utilities, minus your repairs and maintenance, minus your general admin, minus your contract services, minus capital expenditures, minus vacancy. So let's take a look at these a little deeper. So your gross schedule rents. So that's quick. Your number of units times uh, whatever you're charging for rent. Your mortgage and escrow. So that's your mortgage, taxes, and property insurance. And then you have your property management, which is typically somewhere about 8 to 10% of your collector rents. And then they'll also typically charge 1 month rent to actually lease that property to somebody. Then you have your utilities. So those consist of your public lighting, which is electric. So if you have a building, you have everybody or all your tenants pay their own electric bills, but the hallway lights, the outside lights, that's considered public lighting. And then you have your water, unless you're using some sort of rub system where you're able to bill back those utilities to, or that those water that the water usage to your tenants. And then you have repairs and maintenance. So there's really no exact science between how much you should set aside, but you should set aside money every month. So what I tell people is it's based on the condition of your units. So if you just fully gut in and redid the entire unit, then you can set aside less each month because everything is brand new. So you don't anticipate too much going wrong that would need to be repaired or maintenance. So let's say $100. You could possibly do less every month. Whereas if you're buying that older building that has some deferred maintenance that's already occupied, you want to make sure that you're setting more aside per month. So it can, I'll say, up to $350 a month when those things go wrong, so that you'll have that reserve ready to be able to pay for repairs. And then you have your general admin. So that consists of your licenses, inspections, certifications that you may need, your contract services, which is your pest control, lawn care, snow removal. So pest control, me personally, my buildings are all they get sprayed twice a year. So every 6 months to ensure that we're controlling the pests. So you also want to, and that's something also that tenants appreciate because this way they know that you're looking out for them, and it's something that helps them stay around longer. So something that I would encourage you to include. And then you have your capital expenditures. So this is all based off of your property maintenance plan. I'll touch on capital expenditures and just kind of show you how to break that out. And then also you have vacancy, which you can budget about 10% of your rents going toward vacancy. So that's saying 10% of the time, your property may be vacant. So there's no exact science between that as well, but it's just what you can kind of expect. So it's something that you can at least budget for. And then at the end of the day, if you're able to keep your properties rented full time and you have zero vacancy, that's great. That extra money that you budgeted for your vacancy now goes towards your bottom line profit. So, for this buy and hold example, still using the same quad. So we're charging 800 a month. So that brings a value. So 800 times four is 3,200. So our monthly rent is 3,200, and we're putting our value at $320,000. And then 70% of 320 is 225, technically 224, but I just rounded up to 225. So when you're looking at it, you have your scheduled rents, which are 3,200, and then you have 1,800 for your mortgage and escrows. So for this, if you look to the right, I explain how I come up with the estimations that I'm using. So then you have property management, which is 320. You have utilities, which is 150. Repairs and maintenance, budgeting 400 a month. So you have 4 units, $100 a unit, get you to 400 a month for that. Your general admin. So just quickly on that general admin, for me, so your licenses and your inspections and stuff, that's all yearly, so it just gets averaged out. So this is what it's averaged out to. And then you have your contract services. So that's what it's averaged out to at $67 a month that should be set aside. And then vacancy is 320 that's set aside. So our cash flow, so minus our rent, which is 3,200, and then our mortgage and escrow and expenses, that leaves us with a grand total of $78 a month in profit that we can expect to see every month. But that's without even looking at capital expenditures. So if you add in capital expenditures, you're now in the hole $370 a month. So, what are capital expenditures and why should they be included? So, there are funds that you use to improve the property that extends the life of the property. So they're different than maintenance and repairs. So maintenance and repairs can be, hey, my toilet's leaking. Can you send somebody out to fix that? You send somebody out, that's just a repair. Whereas your capital expenditure is you redoing the entire bathroom. So for capital expenditures, over the course of holding a property long term. So if you're saying, hey, I want to buy this property and I want to hold on to it for my life, pass it down to my kids, and they can pass it down to their kids, you need to be looking at and having a maintenance plan for your roof, the mechanicals, your kitchen, your bathroom, your windows, floors, and paint. So typically, I'll say a your capital expenditure that'll typically last sometime somewhere between 15 to 20 years if you just redid everything when you bought the building, or if you bought a building that was just redone. Some of the stuff can last a little longer. Some of it can potentially need to be replaced in a shorter span, but I'll use 15 to 20 years as a general guideline, and then you can adjust based off of how you best see fit. So, with your mechanicals, to replace, most times you're going to have to replace at least your furnace and then most likely your water heater, and then let's say there may be a few pipes that you may want to replace, or an electric line that you may want to upgrade or something like that. But roughly, um, you're going to have to spend about $4,000 to um, re-update your kitchen. You're going to have to spend, let's call it 6,000. Bathroom 4,000, windows 1,000, floors 3,000, paint 1,000. So in order to upgrade your each unit after that 15 a year interval, you're going to be putting out $19,000 a unit for each unit. So that gives you 76,000 that you're going to need at the end of those 15 to 20 years set aside to be able to make these improvements. And then also, don't forget about your roof. So now you're looking at 80,000 that you're going to have to spend on this building to upgrade it. And the reason I say you're going to have to spend this to upgrade it, so if you don't put money towards these capital expenditures, if you don't budget anything, then there's going to be no money set aside when you need to make major improvements to keep up with market rents. So while your building may look nice, brand new now, 15 to 20 years it's going to look dated. So then, if you can't, if you're having trouble getting client or tenants because your property looks dated, you're going to have to charge less in rent. You may be at a point in those 15 to 20 years where the majority of your mortgage is paid off, and you almost own the building free and clear. So it may not be that much of a difference to you, but once again, you may want to also say, hey, so in 15 to 20 years, you may be fine, but what about now that 30 to 40 year period when it's definitely outdated and nobody's really going to be looking for your building? So you want to make sure that you have money set aside to be able to make those updates. So, how do you know how much to set aside each month? So you have so the total that you'll need is 80,000. The year interval that I use is 15 years. You could easily use 20 years, and then the numbers will work out a little different. But so you have 80,000. You divide that by 15 for 15 years. So you have to save at least $5,333 a year. So then, if you break that down into a month, you need to be saving at least $444 a month, which means per unit you need to be saving 111 dollars. So I'll just round everything up. So I'll say that you need per month per unit to save $112 or $448 a month for your building to have this money set aside when it comes time to have that money set aside, so that when it comes time you can easily now take that money and then use it for those updates. So now the bank looks at the debt service coverage ratio. As a buyer, you should be looking at what I like to call your expense coverage ratio. So that's your percentage of profits compared to the actual expenses. So with this, if you have, so if your ratio is greater than one, that means you make a profit. If it's less than one, that means you're operating at a loss. If it's equal to one, that means that you're breaking even. So that's every month. So now, from our previous example, we have our income, which was $3,200 a month. Our expenses were $3,122 a month, which left us a profit of $78. So with this, with that was without capex. So our expense coverage ratio was 1.02. So you can see we were just barely making it, just about breaking even. So now, when you added in our capex, now the expense coverage dropped to zero point 0.9. So our income was 3,200, but our expenses, hard expenses, and what we were budgeting for is 3,570. So now we're operating at a loss. So the question is, how do we reach that break even point? Or better yet, how do we reach profitability? Because nobody gets into real estate to just break even. So, looking at our example with CapEx, it'd be great if we could say, okay, our expenses are going to be 35.70, so we'll just raise rents and have rents be exceed that 35.70 mark, and then that'll be our profit. But unfortunately, we can't magically increase rates, increase the rents to meet or exceed our expenses. So the way that we do this, there's a few things that you can do, but the one way is buying right. So what that means is reducing your mortgage by buying better, by buying at a better price to lower your leverage. And then, so I'll discuss that on the next slide. And then other ways you can find ways to reduce or eliminate vacancies. So your vacancies are expensive. So when you're not bringing that money in, not only are you not bringing the money in, but if you're using a property manager, you then have to pay that property manager, 1 month rent for their leasing fee as a commission or whatever you're able to negotiate with them. On top of that, there's other inspections. So, let's say the tenant has a child that's under, I believe it's six. It's either 6 or 8 in Philadelphia. Now you also have to pay for a lead paint certification, which is an additional 175 bucks. So there are a lot of fees that are associated with leasing, vacancies, and that first lease. So you want to ensure that you're reducing your vacancies because that's where money is lost. So if you can reduce your vacancies and you're operating at full capacity, then that extra 320 that you were setting aside a month for vacancies, or that you weren't even counting on bringing in, that's a 320 additional that you're now bringing in, and then that goes to your bottom line for your profit. So then also you can decrease expenses. So you can look by shopping service providers. So you can look for a better deal on your property insurance, and just look to see if, let's say with your public lighting, is there another company that will charge you less? So looking to decrease expenses is another way. Looking for those extra income producing opportunities. Can you add some sort of coin out laundry or vending machines? And then also, hey, can I find a better price mortgage product that fits my need to reduce the amount that I spend every month on mortgage? So if you can control your cost as far as your repairs and maintenance and vacancy, those go directly to your bottom line if they're not used. So vacancy is money that you weren't even counting on coming in. So now that money's coming in, it goes to your bottom line. Repairs and maintenance is money that you're setting aside for repairs or maintenance that has to be done to the building for that year. So, I mean, I always say you should have a reserve at all times, just so that there's not anything that happens where you then can't fix it for a while because you need to save the money. But anything that goes above that reserve that you have for the year, that now all goes to your bottom line because you don't need that money because the repairs for that year weren't realized, and then the repair that has to be made the next year, you're still setting money aside, so now that money is going to go pay for it. So repairs and maintenance, and then your vacancy legal directly to your bottom line. So I always tell people it's better to budget for those and not need than not budget for and need. And then when we look at our expense coverage ratio and reducing our leverage, so our mortgage amount was 3,200, and our non-debt expenses were 1,322 a month. So let's say I'll say that the minimum expense coverage that you probably want is about a 1.2. So if you set that up you're going to be looking at, okay, so you have 1.2 times what gives me 3,200 a month. So simple algebra equation. So you're solving for that what or that x. So that's saying that 1.2 times 2666 a month will give you 3,200. So now you take that a step further, and then so now your mortgage and escrow payments are going to equal your minimum expense coverage minus your non-debt expenses. So debt is your mortgage. So since our minimum expense coverage that we want total is 2666, we're gonna say okay, that 2666 minus our non-debt expenses of 1322 equal what? So that equals 1344. So we know that's what our mortgage and escrow payment should be. So this is kind of how you back your way into it. So then looking and say, okay, so if my mortgage and escrow payment should be 1344, what does that equal to as far as a mortgage amount? So you would just use a mortgage calculator, either online or an app, and then say, okay, well, we already know previously that our taxes are 134 a month. Our insurance runs us about 150 a month. So that means that the true mortgage payment is $1,060 a month. So what's that buying power of that $1,060 a month? Using the mortgage calculator, you figure out that's a mortgage amount of about $160,000. So, what that means is you have to be able to buy and renovate the property for no more than $160,000. Technically, you want to be in less than $160,000 if when you refinance, you expect to pull out your money for that you spent for your entry costs and your holding costs. So when you look at it, our predicted cash flow for this now is $534 a month. So we get that by 3,200 minus 2666 gives us a cash flow of 534. So then taking it a step further, which is a fun fact, if rents decrease by 10% during a recession, you would still net a profit of $210. So, looking at the market cycle which we're in, this may be something that you want to be sensitive to as well, knowing that you have enough cash flow every month to be able to reduce rents if needed to still attract tenants. Or maybe the tenants that you have in, they know that rents are now dropping across the board, so they come to you on their next lease renewal and request that you reduce their rent. And then once again, like I said, repairs and vacancies. If we can manage our repair costs and then do a really job keeping our buildings full, they get added directly to the bottom line. So your cash flow would balloon to $1,254. So once again, it's better to budget for it and not need it than not budget for it and need it. So, what impact does this have to the burst strategy? Unfortunately, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, stay under 70 to 75% of the ARV so that you can refinance it. Because as we saw from our example, even at that 70% that we refied it at, the numbers just didn't work out. So, in this example that I showed and how to rework it, you would then need to be all in for no more than 50% of the ARV. So, the mortgage numbers worked out so that the max mortgage we could have is 160,000. So that 160 divided by the 320, which is the property value, is 50%. So from that, so backing into it, you want to look, determine what your property rents for when you're looking to be successful in executing this burst strategy. You want to determine what the property rents are going to be. Then you want to determine the ARV of the property. Then you want to look and determine your operating expenses. And then you also want to determine what your profitability point is using this expense coverage ratio. And then from that, you want to ensure that you can buy, renovate, and refinance the property at a profitable um, at a profitable expense coverage ratio. So for this, I showed that the minimum that I'd use is probably 1.2 or saying 20%. So after all of my expenses are paid, I want to make at least 20%. So, what this is, if you want to say, hey, I want to bump up the expense coverage ratio so that I'm saying, okay, for every dollar I'm spending in expense, I want to bring in 30-cent profit or 40% profit or 50 cents, so 1.3 or 1.4 or 1.5. That all works too. But what that would do is just reduce what your max mortgage amount could be. So when you're like I said, so you want to ensure that you can buy, renovate, and refinance that property at whatever a profitable expense coverage ratio is that works for what you want to be bringing in each month for that property. And then you also want to ensure that your entry and holding costs are considered so you can pull that money out at the refi as well. So if we know that the most that we can have for a mortgage is 160, then and we know, let's say, okay, well, I spent 10 grand to get into the property and to hold the property. I'm sorry, entry and holding costs. That means truthfully you have to be able to fix the property for buy the property and fix it for about $150,000, and then but the mortgage that you're going to get is still 160, because then that $10,000 to make up the difference between 150 and 160 comes back to you. So that way you're able to pull all the money out of your deal that you put into it. So your true max allowable offer is always your mortgage amount of the expense ratio profitability point. So whatever that is. So here, our expense profitability point was the mortgage amount of that was 160,000 minus your construction costs. So let's say if I have, okay, I know that my mortgage is going to be or the top that I can have for a mortgage is 160. My construction costs, let's say, are going to be 80,000. So now that means that my max purchase price of this property initially has to be no more than $80,000. And once again, don't forget, if you want to pull out the money even that you had invested in your entry and your holding costs, then truthfully, you want to your max offer is going to be no more than, let's say, 70,000. If it was 10,000 that you're going to have to put in to enter into the deal and to hold the deal. So that's your 160 minus 80 in construction, then minus your 10, which is your entry and holding costs, meaning that you want to be able to buy that property for $70,000. So now this might seem, like nothing that you ever heard before. It might seem something that can't really be done in this market. But what I tell people, it can be done. There are different market cycles. You have to know what market cycle you're in. So right now the market cycle is up. I'm not going to say that we're at the top of the market, because then that would indicate that we're going to be coming down soon. Um, but we're at the top of the market where sellers are expecting more for their properties because property values are rising. So it may not be a good time to buy rentals if you can't buy them correctly. So personally, what I've been doing, I've been focusing on those properties that need full gut jobs, and I'm also buying in areas where I like the areas personally, but they're not areas where a lot of people are heavily invested in already, driving those prices up. So I'm able to get properties that meet my numbers, that work for my numbers, and I'm not going on bidding wars and having to bid properties up, that just don't make sense for me. So I tell everybody, always operate and do your numbers when you're looking at rentals based on your total expenses. If you don't, it's really easy to slide into being a slumlord. So I always say, I personally, I tend to think the best of people. So I don't think anybody woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm going to be a slumlord. Here I go. It always starts off good, and then one reason or another, 9 times out of 10, they weren't doing their numbers correctly. They didn't understand all the numbers that they had to budget for. And then when fixes need to be done, there was no money available to do those fixes. So then their property just slid into further and further disrepair until they reach that point where they can't fix anything, and now they're just trying to bring as much money in as possible before the city shuts them down, and before they have to then sell the property. And so that's why I always tell people, always make sure that you're doing it based on your total expenses. It may seem hard. I know that there's not really an easy way to say if your deal meets this criteria, it's a deal. Unfortunately for this, you kind of have to roll up your sleeves and dig deeper to make sure that you're holding these properties. One way, for instance, that you can not include capex into your numbers is if your hold period is only going to be, let's say, 5 to 7 years. So if you plan on holding your property for 5 to 7 years, collecting the rents, and then selling to somebody else, well, then there's really no need to collect or budget for those capital expenditures because you're going to be out of the property before those capital expenditures even come due. So that's that additional money that now can be going to your profit each month. But if you're somebody that plans on holding on to your properties for as long as you live and passing them down through generation to generation, you don't have that luxury of not including into your properties for capital expenditures because at some point you're going to need to spend money to improve that property to keep the life of that property going. Now, this isn't saying that this is the end all be all. There are people who've been investing in real estate, and there's a lot of other strategies that people may implement. Um, but this is something that I use to ensure that as I'm buying properties, I know that the properties that I'm getting into are going to be cash flow positive for me, and that I'm including everything into it so that I know walking into the door, this is what I need before I even put my offer in. Okay, well, this is how much work it's going to need. This is what my total expenses are going to be for the project once it's done, and then this is what the mortgage amount, the max mortgage amount that I can have. So then I use that to then back into, okay, well, here's what my offer is going to be for this property. If I can't get it um, for this number that I need, for no more than this number that I need it for, I'll walk and then try to find the next deal. Like I said, this stuff, if you look at the number of blighted properties and rentals, or in the number of people living in rentals that have a lot of deferred maintenance, this is the exact reason, because of the expenses. I can't stress it enough. Um, you know, you can do what works for you. You might be able to tweak your numbers some, maybe not set as much aside for your repairs and maintenance every month. But once again, it's better to budget and have than not budget and then need. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Please like, share, comment if you found any value. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.